Ladies and gentlemen, today I want you to imagine something. Imagine crossing oceans and borders, leaving behind everything familiar, your home, your language, your comfort, all for the chance to believe in a promise called America. Imagine stepping into a world that looks at you as an outsider, yet still daring to say, I belong here. Now imagine not just surviving that world, but changing it. This isn't just a story about politics. It's a story about courage, about faith, about the fire that refuses to die even when every wind tries to blow it out. It's the story of a dreamer who didn't just come to chase the American dream, but to remind America what that dream really means. We live in a time where division is louder than unity, where walls are easier to build than bridges, and where too many people have stopped believing that their voice matters. But tonight, I want to talk about someone who's rewriting that narrative, someone who's making Americans believe again, someone who's proving that the power to change this country doesn't come from privilege or position. It comes from people, from grit, from heart. So as you listen to this story, I want you to feel what millions are feeling, hope rekindling, because this isn't just about one person rising. It's about an entire generation waking up. It's about every immigrant, every worker, every believer who's ever been told, you don't belong, standing up and saying, watch me. This is the story of the immigrant who's changing American politics. And by the end of this speech, you'll understand that this isn't just their story. It's yours too. Stay with me till the end, because what you're about to hear is not just a speech. It's a reminder that belief, once awakened, can move nations from outsider to catalyst. That is the essence of transformation, the story of a soul who walked into a system not built for them and still dared to reshape it. The immigrant's journey into American politics begins not with privilege, but with perseverance. They arrive in a land of contradictions, a place that preaches equality but practices exclusion, that celebrates freedom but sometimes forgets who it belongs to. They stand at the edge of power, watching a machine built on generations of insiders, and make a choice to no longer remain a spectator. That single choice to step forward turns an outsider into a force of change, because every step they take toward belonging is also a challenge to the idea that belonging must be granted. They did not inherit their voice. They earned it. They learned the rhythm of this country, not from textbooks, but from experience, from struggle, from survival, from watching how opportunity and injustice often share the same street. Their story is the story of every immigrant who has ever worked harder, spoken louder, and dreamed bigger just to be heard. Yet what makes this person different is not just that they entered politics, but that they entered it with purpose, not to blend in, but to break through. They didn't come to imitate the system. They came to ignite it. Every word they speak carries the weight of journeys walked by millions who were told they would never belong. And in that defiance lies their power. From outsider to catalyst means more than personal success. It means awakening a collective conscience. When someone who was once unseen starts to lead, it sends a message that no gate can keep out determination. Their rise becomes a mirror held up to America, forcing it to confront its contradictions and remember its promise. They represent what happens when the excluded refuse to remain silent, when the invisible step into the light. Their courage exposes a truth too long ignored, that the American dream is not a birthright, but a belief. Whoever dares to chase it with enough fire becomes part of its evolution. The beauty of this transformation is that it doesn't come from bitterness. It comes from belief. They don't seek revenge against the system that once overlooked them. Instead, they challenge it with empathy and conviction, teaching even their critics what renewal looks like. They understand pain, but they also understand progress. They know what it means to fight for every inch of respect, and that's why they fight harder for everyone else's. When they speak, they don't just speak about policy. They speak about purpose. When they lead, they don't just lead for their community. They lead for every person who has ever felt like a stranger in their own home. From outsider to catalyst is not just a personal story. It's a national turning point. It's proof that the American identity is not fixed. It's fluid, expanding with every brave soul who steps forward and says, I belong here too. They are not erasing old traditions. They are redefining them. They are turning politics back into what it was always meant to be, a reflection of the people, not the powerful. Their journey reminds America of its own immigrant roots, of the millions who came before seeking freedom, and of the millions still fighting to keep that freedom alive. In every way, their rise symbolizes the renewal of the American spirit. They've taken the outsider struggle and turned it into the nation's story once again, a story of courage, conviction, and change. Because when an immigrant becomes a catalyst, they don't just change politics. They change what it means to lead, to belong, and to believe in America all over again, the voice of the unheard. That is where this movement draws its heartbeat from. For years, the halls of power echoed with familiar accents, familiar faces, familiar names. The same voices spoke for the same people, while millions stood outside, unseen and unheard. The workers who built the bridges, the mothers who kept families together, the dreamers who believed in a better tomorrow, they all existed, but they were invisible in the language of politics. It takes someone who has lived in that silence to understand its weight. The immigrant who now stands at the center of American politics doesn't just speak. They translate pain into power. They are the voice of those who had stories but no stage, dreams but no platform, hopes but no microphone. Their strength comes from empathy, not entitlement. They know what it means to be spoken over, dismissed, or doubted. Every word they say carries the echo of those who never had the chance to say theirs. They understand struggle not as a statistic, but as a memory. The long hours, the uncertain paychecks, the fear of being forgotten by the very nation they helped build. When they rise to speak, they bring with them the faces of those who carried this country on their backs but were never invited to its table. Their presence alone becomes a message that the American story cannot be told without the immigrant, the laborer, the fighter, the dreamer. To be the voice of the unheard means daring to speak uncomfortable truths. It means calling out injustice, not with anger, but with clarity. It means refusing to let silence be mistaken for peace. This person doesn't just talk about the people. They are the people. They have lived the life they now defend. That authenticity makes their words impossible to ignore. Every sentence is rooted in lived experience. Every pause carries the emotion of those who have waited too long to be recognized. They do not speak from a podium of privilege, but from the ground of perseverance. That difference changes everything. When they speak, the forgotten feel seen again. The worker hears their struggle reflected in power. The student hears their ambition spoken with pride. The mother hears her sacrifices honored. That is what true representation feels like, not a speech written by a strategist, but a message written by life itself. This is why their voice resonates so deeply. It is not polished. It is pure. It speaks in the rhythm of reality, the language of labor, the tone of truth. They have turned the political stage into a platform of humanity, reminding everyone that progress is not about power, but about people. They give voice not just to pain, but to potential. They remind the nation that the unheard are not voiceless. They're simply waiting for someone brave enough to amplify them. And when one person finally does, it creates a ripple that can't be contained. The immigrant's voice becomes a chorus, awakening others who had once stayed silent out of fear or fatigue. The strength of that chorus doesn't come from volume. It comes from authenticity. It doesn't demand attention. It earns it. In giving a voice to the unheard, they are not just speaking for others. They are teaching others to speak for themselves. That is the truest form of leadership. It's not about being the loudest. It's about being the most honest. Their rise reminds America that democracy is only real when everyone can be heard. And now, through their courage, millions who once whispered their hopes in the dark are finally speaking them out loud. The silence has been broken, and in its place grows a sound America can no longer ignore, the sound of its people, united by the voice that finally remembered them, breaking the mold of power. That's what makes this figure unlike anyone the political stage has seen in a long time. In a system built to reward conformity, they have chosen authenticity. In a culture that values polished speeches and rehearsed charm, they bring honesty, raw, unfiltered, unapologetic. They don't fit into the old templates of power, and that's exactly why they matter. American politics has long been shaped by a pattern. Familiar faces, familiar language, and predictable promises. But when someone who does and fit the mold steps forward, the system trembles because they don't just challenge the players, they challenge the game itself. The immigrant who's changing American politics doesn't walk in with permission. They walk in with purpose. They don't ask to be accepted. They make space for themselves and others like them. Every time they speak, every time they take a stand, they remind people that leadership isn't inherited. It's earned. Their rise is not the story of being chosen by power, but of creating power from the ground up. That is what it means to break the mold. They refuse to be a reflection of the system. Instead, they become a reflection of the people the system forgot. This person doesn't hide their accent or their story. They wear it as armor. They don't smooth their edges to fit in. They sharpen them to cut through the noise. The old ways of politics thrive on performance, on carefully measured words meant to please everyone and mean nothing. But their authenticity burns through that illusion. When they speak, people listen not because of position, but because of truth. And in today's climate, truth has become the rarest form of power. That's why they stand out. Not because they're loud, but because they're real. Breaking the mold of power also means refusing to follow the script. They don't wait for permission to challenge the status quo, and they don't wait for approval to speak up. They don't belong to the establishment. And that independence terrifies those who do, because every time they rise, they prove that the gatekeepers no longer hold the keys. Their strength comes from the streets, from the working class neighborhoods, from the people who never had lobbyists to fight for them. Their campaign is not built on image. It's built on impact. They're not a symbol of rebellion. They are its embodiment. Their power is disruptive because it's rooted in honesty, not hierarchy. They aren't trying to become part of the system that once ignored them. They're rewriting its code. They are the new definition of leadership, one that listens more than it lectures, one that unites more than it divides. They speak to hearts, not demographics. They remind everyone that politics doesn't belong to the privileged few, but to every person with a dream and a voice. And when people realize that, the old mold of power begins to crack. What truly breaks the mold is how they redefine strength in a world that confuses dominance with leadership. They show that true strength lies in compassion, in resilience, in the courage to care. They don't fight to win power for themselves. They fight to return it to the people. Their success isn't measured in headlines or handshakes, but in the hope they reignite across the nation. That's the kind of power that can't be controlled, the kind that spreads. So when they stand on a stage, it's not just another politician speaking. It's a revolution in motion. They have shattered the illusion that power has a single face, a single voice, or a single story. And in doing so, they've opened the door for countless others who will follow, people who will no longer wait for permission to lead. Because once someone breaks the mold can never be remade. A new definition of patriotism. That's what this movement represents. For generations, patriotism in America has been painted in narrow colors, flags, slogans, and speeches that often confused love of country with loyalty to power. But now that idea is being rewritten. This immigrant standing on the front lines of change has shown that patriotism ISNT inherited, it's earned through action, through contribution, through sacrifice. They've reminded a nation that loving America doesn't require being born here. It requires believing in what this country can be, not just what it was. Their story is not about arrival. It's about belonging, about proving that devotion to this land comes from the heart, not from a birth certificate. True patriotism, as they embody it, is not loud or boastful. It doesn't need to scream about greatness. It simply works for it. They show love for America, not by clinging to its symbols, but by strengthening its soul. Every law they fight for, every injustice they challenge, every voice they uplift, that is their pledge of allegiance. Their patriotism is lived, not declared. It is in their willingness to confront the flaws of the nation while still believing in its promise. That kind of love is harder, deeper, and far more powerful than blind pride. It's the love of someone who has seen both the dream and the distance to reach it, and who still chooses to believe it's worth the climb. For too long, America's idea of patriotism has been exclusive. A gate built around identity. Immigrants were told to prove their loyalty, to hide their roots, to speak their love for this country louder than anyone else. But this new voice in politics refuses to play that game. They don't prove their patriotism through imitation. They prove it through contribution. They've taken the immigrants' struggle and turned it into America's strength. They remind the nation that the truest patriots are those who build, who serve, who dream, even when the world tells them they don't belong. Their love for this country is not measured in words, but in work. This new definition of patriotism is inclusive, not possessive. It doesn't draw lines between us and them. It says that anyone who believes in justice, equality, and opportunity is part of the American story. It's a patriotism that unites rather than divides, that embraces rather than excludes. They are proving that to love America is to hold it accountable, to push it closer to its ideals, to demand that its promise be real for everyone, not just the privileged. That's the kind of patriotism that builds nations, not just narratives. They've redefined what the flag stands for. To them, it doesn't wave for perfection. It waves for progress. It doesn't hide flaws. It challenges the nation to fix them. Their version of patriotism is brave enough to question, honest enough to care, and strong enough to change. When they stand in front of a crowd, they don't speak of America as a finished masterpiece, but as a work in progress, one that belongs to all who are willing to add their brushstroke. That vision of belonging, of shared responsibility, has begun to transform how people see themselves in this country. This is what makes their story revolutionary. They have taken the narrative of an immigrant, once framed as an outsider, and turned it into the most patriotic story of all, because who loves a country more than someone who chose it, who fought to be part of it, who still believes in it even when it falters? That's the kind of patriotism that doesn't fade with politics. It endures through generations. They've shown America that true love for one's country doesn't come from standing still and shouting its name. It comes from moving forward and helping it live up to its own ideals. That's the new patriotism. Fierce, fearless, and finally free from boundaries, building bridges, not walls. This phrase captures the essence of what this new wave of leadership stands for. It isn't just a political statement, it's a moral compass, a vision of connection in an era of division. The immigrant, who's changing American politics, is doing something extraordinary, turning difference into dialogue and fear into understanding. They are reminding people that strength doesn't come from separation, but from solidarity. In a time when voices are shouting across ideological, racial, and cultural lines, they are speaking in a language that everyone can understand, the language of humanity. Their leadership is built not on confrontation, but on connection. They see people not as voters to be won, but as lives to be understood. Building bridges means daring to meet people where they are, even those who disagree. It means listening before speaking, understanding before arguing, and caring before condemning. That takes courage, the kind that can't be scripted or spun. This individual story embodies that courage. They know what it feels like to be misunderstood, to be judged for an accent, a background, a name. That experience becomes their strength. It teaches them empathy, patience, and the ability to reach across divides that others are too afraid to cross. Instead of weaponizing difference, they humanize it. Instead of using pain to provoke anger, they use it to create awareness. That's what makes their approach revolutionary in a political landscape built on division. When they speak about unity, it's not empty rhetoric. It comes from lived truth. They understand that America's greatness has never been about uniformity. It's about unity and diversity. Their leadership style is a reflection of that truth. They bring people from different communities, ideologies, and walks of life into the same conversation. They turn political rivals into collaborators and cynicism into cooperation. In doing so, they show the nation that bridges are not built with bricks and policies alone. They're built with trust. And trust, once built, has the power to heal. Building bridges also means facing resistance. There will always be those who profit from division, who find comfort in walls, literal or symbolic, but they continue to rise above that noise, showing that kindness and conviction can coexist. They don't confuse compromise with weakness. They see it as wisdom. They know that lasting change isn't achieved by shouting louder, but by inviting others to listen longer. Their voice doesn't dominate the room. It opens it up. And in that openness, people find something rare. The possibility of hope. Their leadership is a reflection of America at its best, diverse yet united, challenged yet courageous. They show that unity doesn't mean sameness. It means choosing respect over resentment and collaboration over confrontation. In every speech, every campaign, every policy they push forward, there's a thread of connection, a reminder that walls may divide for a moment, but bridges endure for generations, and through their actions. They are proving that building bridges isn't just about bringing people together. It's about rebuilding trust in a system that has forgotten how to listen. Their movement transcends politics. It's cultural, emotional, and profoundly human. They make people believe again that dialogue is possible, that empathy still matters, that decency can still win. They remind us that the true test of leadership is not how many people you silence, but how many you unite. In a time when walls seem easier to build than bridges, they choose the harder path because it's the right one. And by doing so, they're not just changing politics, they're changing the very meaning of leadership. Their bridges connect more than communities. They connect hearts, turning division into dialogue and fear into faith in one another once again, inspiring a new generation. That is perhaps the most profound legacy of this immigrant's rise in American politics. It's not just about winning elections or passing laws. It's about awakening belief in a generation that had stopped believing. For years, young people looked at politics and saw corruption, hypocrisy, and distance. They saw leaders who spoke in empty promises and systems that never seemed to change. But now they see someone who reflects their struggles, their voices, and their dreams. They see a leader who wasn't born into privilege, who didn't inherit power, but who carved it out of persistence. And that changes everything. Because when young people see someone who looks like them, who sounds like them, who carries the same scars and the same hope, they stop feeling powerless. They start feeling possible. This is not a generation inspired by slogans. They're inspired by substance. They want truth, transparency, and courage. And that's exactly what this figure embodies. Their authenticity breaks through the noise of politics as usual. They don't just talk about change. They are the change. Every speech, every campaign, every stand they take becomes a lesson in courage for those watching. Young immigrants, students, activists, and dreamers are seeing that leadership ISNT reserved for the elite. It's earned through empathy, effort, and endurance. They're learning that they too have the right to take up space, to speak, to lead, to belong. That realization is revolutionary because belief is the first spark of transformation. The way they inspire is not by pretending to be perfect, but by being unapologetically human. They share their failures, their rejections, the moments when they almost gave up. They talk about fear, not to glorify it, but to show that courage is what happens when you act anyway. In doing so, they make leadership relatable, not unreachable. Young people don't see them as a distant figure on a stage. They see them as someone who's walked the same roads, faced the same doubt, and still chose to rise. That relatability becomes power. It creates a ripple effect that spreads far beyond politics into classrooms, communities, and conversations where young people start saying, if they can, maybe I can too. They are not just inspiring political engagement. They're inspiring purpose. They remind young people that change doesn't always start in office. It starts in attitude. It starts when one person chooses to care, to speak up, to get involved. Through their actions, they've turned activism into something attainable, not abstract. They've made it cool to care again. The youth who once scrolled past politics are now showing up, voting, organizing, speaking. That's not just participation. That's empowerment. And empowerment is contagious. Their message to this generation is simple but profound. You don't have to wait to be invited to lead. You already belong. That's the energy they've unleashed. A generation that refuses to be silenced, that refuses to settle for a system built on exclusion. These young people aren't just following their lead. They're expanding it, shaping their own movements, redefining what leadership looks like in their image. This is how revolutions begin. Not with one person standing tall, but with millions standing up. Their story gives the next generation permission to dream again, not of escaping the system, but of rebuilding it. They've turned politics from something distant into something deeply personal. And as young people take that belief into their own hands, America begins to evolve once more, not through the force of power, but through the power of belief. This immigrant has done more than enter the political arena. They've reignited a sense of purpose in those who will inherit it. And that might just be their greatest victory, not in changing the game today, but in inspiring the players who will change it tomorrow. And so as we stand at this moment in history, we are witnessing something extraordinary, not just a political shift, but a spiritual one. A reminder that greatness does not come from privilege, but from perseverance, that leadership is not about titles, but about truth. This immigrant, this trailblazer has not just entered the heart of American politics. They have redefined it. They have shown us that courage doesn't need permission, that hope doesn't need translation, and that the American dream still belongs to anyone brave enough to chase it. Their journey has become a mirror in which we see the best of ourselves, our struggle, our resilience, our belief in something bigger than fear. They've taught us that too. Love a country is to fight for its promise, to speak for those who can't, to build bridges where walls once stood. In their rise, we are reminded that no one is ever truly an outsider in a nation built by dreamers. They've turned politics into poetry, the kind that stirs hearts, unites voices, and inspires generations to come. This is more than a story of one person's triumph. It's a call to all of us, a call to believe again in our power, in our purpose, and in each other. Because America doesn't just need new leaders, it needs new believers. And today, as we look ahead, we know that belief has been reignited. So let us walk forward together, not divided by difference, but strengthened by it. Let us carry this message beyond words and into action. Let us prove that change is not a dream waiting to happen. It's a decision waiting to be made. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. And thank you for daring to hope again. The future is in your hands. And to each of you who chooses to build, to lead, to dream, good luck, because the story of America is still being written. And now it's your turn to hold the pen.